Hi, my name is DeMeyere. I currently live in Chesapeake, Virginia. I'm married, have a wife, and actually have 5 sons. And I continue to serve the Army as an Army civilian. But I enlisted in 1982 as a military intelligence analyst and served from 1982 to 2005.
What was your rank when you got out?
When I got out of the Army, I was a major. So, but actually enlisted, like I said, in 1982, delayed enlistment, went active on October 12th, 1982, and took a plane to Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri to do my basic training. I was not an ordnance or an engineer, but that's where we did the basic training. As I said, I was a military intelligence analyst, so my second duty station was actually in an Air Force base, at Lackland Air Force Base, doing Russian language.
Let's go back to basic training.
What about it?
What was a day like in basic training?
Basic training was, it was actually fairly, I was 25 years old when I went in. And most of the people that I went into basic training with were probably 18, 19, 20 years old.
You were the old man?
Yeah, a little bit older, but some of them were you know, close to my age. It was actually very easy. Obviously it's regimented, and they do the, you know, try to break you down and build you back up. But you know, being that old and actually having a family already, much of my basic training time was quite easy. You know, it was not that stressful. But that being said, it's physical. You do things that you probably have not, even though you probably are in fairly good shape, things you have not done maybe since high school, like running PT and doing that type of stuff. But the regimentation is probably the key part, you know, learning how to work as a team. Obviously there's the marching and all that stuff, but working as a team and as a soldier is different than working as a team and, you know, in a civilian job.
What were barracks like?
The barracks were actually open bay for, well, actually not open bay, but we had
brick, wood.
No, they were brick barracks. Okay. Sometimes they're called H barracks or something like that, just the design. But we had, I want to say, full squad to the room. Probably maybe like 12 people in the room. Not bunk beds, single beds. You know, not, but you know, the typical basic training stuff. You know, your bunk's got to be made perfectly. You've got to be able to, you know, do the square corners, and they open up your wall locker, and everything's got to be rolled perfectly and right dress. Some people had issues with that or problems with that, but it was not difficult. Pardon?
What was the food like?
Food was always good. You never wanted for food. You may eat too fast because they want to hurry you up, but the food was always good for us. Cannot complain about the food.
KP?
Very little. Very little. Not like it was maybe years before, but there was some guard duty types situations, fire guard, but we really didn't do KP. And part of it is there's, you know, the kitchen sanitation issues that they had obviously were different for us maybe than for some people in the past. But
any bivouacking, anything like that?
Oh, we did. We bivouacked. We did a couple exercises where we actually went out and bivouacked. And it was interesting that one of the, our final bivouac, for instance, was in December. December at Fort Leonard, Missouri is not necessarily cold, but it's wet. And we had a bunch of rain. And they actually had us bivouacked on hills. And one of the next mornings, there were tents, shelter halves, you know, where you share a half a tent with somebody. At the bottom of the hill, we were fortunate enough, ours was fine, but it was wet and miserable. And they were going to road march us back in to the, after we were done, we were out there for like 3 days total. The final bivouac. And they had to walk us across a ford where vehicles come through a creek, and the water was waist high in some places, and they had ropes across between 2 vehicles, and we followed the rope across, and after we got across, they put us in what's called a cattle truck, which is like a semi bus, and took us back. But what was going to be a great experience of bivouacking turned out to be a little bit miserable, but we survived.
You know a nickname for Fort Leonard Wood, don't you?
Yeah, lost in the woods. We were lost in the woods on a hill and far away. So,
Well, the nickname I'd heard was Little Korea.
Little Korea, no,
Hot in
no,
the summer,
no,
cold in the
oh
winter.
yeah, it is. But they call it lost in the woods.
Okay.
So, yeah.
So, did you like do a lot of go to shooting range or rifle range?
Oh, we did. We did our qualifications. We did our practice and so forth with the M16, and also grenade range. You know, qualified with the grenade, qualified with the M16. And no other arms at the time, but that was basically it. And it's growing up around firearms and stuff, it was not a real issue. But the M16 is a different animal compared to a hunting rifle. I guarantee that.
Mm-hmm.
So, but it was fun. It was good. I could not complain at
Okay.
all.
So what got you into intelligence? How'd you get into it?
That is a good question. I don't know. I don't know what they saw, but it just happened to be on my score. My ASVAB score was high enough, and then they give you a language scoring test called DLAB at the time, Defense Language Aptitude Battery, and that was high. It was high enough so that they just said, well, we're going to make you a French analyst or a Russian analyst as opposed to something else. It's like, I don't know. I wouldn't be able to tell you, you know, French, Russian, English, Italian from anything else. You know, but why Russian? I don't know. Why Russian was because that was our main threat at the time, obviously. So they made me Russian analyst.
Did you learn Russian then, or?
I did, yeah. I couldn't speak a word of it now. I might be able to say a couple numbers, and that is about it. But you know, languages are one of those things that if you don't use them all the time, you lose them.
Mm-hmm.
Even people who grow up speaking a certain language, if they stop speaking it, you know, they understand, but they may not be able to speak it anymore. And having 1982 was a long time ago. Actually, so language school started in actually January of '83. That's a long time ago. And if you don't use it, it's gone. There's no question about it.
So did you have a graduation?
From basic training?
Yep.
Yep, sure did. I was there by myself, but that's okay.
Did you know anybody in basic at all?
No, not a single person. There was nobody that I went to basic training with at all. Now, there were some people that were what's considered college ops, where they're going to go on to from basic training into officer candidate school or something like that. And I probably could have known some of them, but no, that wasn't the case. So.
Okay. So you graduate and you go where?
Graduate, go on leave for Christmas, and then 2 weeks after that,
You got to go home?
I got to go home. It was Christmas break. There was nothing going on anywhere. Instead of having people what's called snowbird at a place where there's nothing, they send you home on leave. So I went home on leave, and then a couple weeks later, got on an airplane and went to San Antonio, Texas, to Lackland Air Force Base to learn Russian language. And did that for almost a year, the better part of a year. So January till December, we're learning Russian language. And once
You were at school the whole time?
The whole time. After that, finishing Russian language, which was difficult, there's no question about it. There's several people that just can't make it. They wash out or they give up and then decide, I want to go do something else. Giving up and going someplace else would mean I would have probably been infantry, which probably would have been okay, but that's not necessarily what I was looking for.
So you learn Russian language. You're not just learning the words.
Oh,
you're learning verbs and
everything.
The whole thing.
The whole thing.
Yeah.
By the time you're finished with the schooling, you can take dictation in headphones, listening to the tapes and whatnot, and for the most part, you can do a fairly good translation of what they're saying. Actually, dictation. We're actually writing the Russian language in the Russian script.
So you learn to write it too?
You learn how to write it, read it, and speak it, which is challenging. Russian is probably one of the more difficult languages.
So when you get out of this school, what's your rank now?
All right, so going back a little bit, so
Okay.
when I left basic training, all right, I actually I went to basic training as a PFC. Had a college degree when I went in, so I went in at the rank of PFC. I didn't wear the rank in basic training, but when I graduated, that's what my rank was. So I went to language school as a PFC, and finished language school as a PFC, and then from language school going on to Goodfellow Air Force Base, where they actually do the intelligence analyst training. Various types of things of, how to decipher different things and so forth. But it's how to be an analyst versus how to speak Russian. So you take the combination of the two and put them together to make a full package, so to speak.
So were you in uniform the whole time? Or?
Oh yes, yep.
So, okay.
Everybody wore uniforms. There was no civilian clothes in school, but of course, the language school was such that you lived. It was actually a company tour versus unaccompanied, like going to basic training or something like that. So I had my family there and with me at the time.
Oh, you were married at the
I
time?
was married, yeah. Married with
Okay.
2 kids at the time. So, yep.
Live on base then? Or?
No, there was nothing on base, so we had an apartment, just a little way, a couple miles up the air base, with several other couples that were doing the same thing that we were doing. So, which was good, because that gave you the camaraderie you needed to actually get through the school, because it's rough. It's a tough school.
And the
It's not,
family
it's
has
not
nobody-
physically tough,
Yeah.
but it's mentally tough, and then having a family there keeps you grounded for one thing, but having those other people that were learning the language with you to do the studying and stuff made a big difference. So,
And your family gets to know
Yeah.
people too.
all right. So after language school, I mentioned I went to Goodfellow Air Force Base to actually learn how to become an analyst. That's 4 months, and then
An analyst of what?
in Russian analyst, I was a 98 Charlie at the time, which is a Russian linguist analyst. And so I was learning how to take dictation of Russian, not only Russian language, but the military part of being an analyst versus just the regular language, learning how to dictate language and numbers and stuff like that, or translate numbers. So learning how to actually do the military side of the Russian language. And you actually get more of the military side of what you're looking at as an analyst versus just, like I said, the language itself. And it was good. It was 4 months. Everybody, for the most part, that we had at the language school accompanied us to the Advanced Individual Training, or AIT, at Goodfellow.
Family came with you? And
No, the family had to stay in San Antonio at the time. There was no arrangements or facilities for families there, and it was a short period of time. 4
Why
months.
San Antonio? Why San Antonio?
It's actually good. San Angelo, Texas is where Goodfellow Air Force Base is.
Okay, all right.
San Antonio, Lackland Air Force Base, Goodfellow Air Force Base is San Angelo, Texas. But the family stayed in San Antonio while I was at school up there in Goodfellow, and there again that was in barracks. But it was different than basic training, that's for sure. It's not the same. So, and it was
Not quite as structured.
definitely not quite as structured, but they still had quite a bit of there was quite a bit of regimentation just to make sure that to get into this field you had to have a security clearance, and they didn't want anybody going off the rail, so they kept you pretty well tied down, so to speak.
Okay.
Yeah. So following graduation from Goodfellow Air Force Base, my first duty assignment was actually an unaccompanied assignment in Sinop, Turkey. So Sinop was a field station, Army field station on the Black Sea, a little tiny peninsula sticking out into the Black Sea, across from Russia at the time, or the USSR. Hence why I was a Russian linguist, because they stationed me there, and spent a year there doing language and analyst.
How many people on this base?
It was pretty small, very small. It was not only, since it was a field station, it was a department, it was a DOD, even though it said Army field station, we did have Navy people there. They had their own facility a little bit further out. And there were some foreign nationals there also at another site just a little ways away. But ours was primarily Army. Probably 200, 250 people total, something like that.
So what did your folks think of you doing this?
Well, first I think they were shocked to start with that I joined the military, but they understood, and obviously my parents were very, very glad I did. But obviously they were concerned about, you know, being away and being on an unaccompanied tour, as my first tour. But they were very supportive. Everybody was, so I could not complain. But my goal going in to the Army in the first place was at some point in time to apply for Officer Candidate School and go that route to get a commission.
Did you know this from when you first started, that you would go that route, Officer Candidate School?
I was definitely going to try. But there was also the other aspect that, well, if I don't get it, I'm going to do my tour and probably get out, right? But after doing the first couple years, I was pretty confident that I was going to at least try to do OCS and go to Officer Candidate School and gain my commission. And while I was in Turkey, I put the paperwork together and sent it off. We got the recommendations from the commander there, and, you know, first sergeant and platoon sergeant, and the people I work with.
Is your wife with you though?
No, that's unaccompanied, all unaccompanied.
Yeah.
But while I was there, I put the packet in, and shortly before I was ready to leave to come back to the States, got notification that I had been accepted at Officer Candidate School. But I had to do almost another half of my next tour just to get a slot. Just, you know, timing was such. So, but finishing up.
And where was that at?
That was at Fort Meade, Maryland, at National NSA headquarters. So, National Security Agency in the Russian language area, doing that. So, I spent probably a little over a year and a half at NSA or at Fort Meade, working there before I actually got to go to OCS, which was just fine. It worked out well. So.
And your family's with you now?
My family's with me this time, yeah. So we were able to get a place on Fort Meade. So coming from a hardship tour or unaccompanied tour, you get kind of a higher priority over people that are PCSing or doing a permanent change of station from a stateside assignment. So, or any of the assignments because of the remote tour. So it worked out pretty good. But so I spent a year and a half at Fort Meade and hit the road again off to Fort Benning, Georgia to go to Officer Candidate School. And if I had to compare basic training to Officer Candidate School, basic training was a cakewalk compared to OCS. There's no question about it. It was mentally brutal for some people, just because of the same, you know, break you down, build you up concept that the Army has to, you know, form and mold soldiers. Physically demanding, and it was 14 weeks of I don't know, I'm not gonna say hell, but it was definitely a challenge.
You're not the only one to have said that.
It's a challenge. Yeah, it's a challenge. Enjoyable. I mean, met some good friends, and people that followed me, or that we moved along a career path for a few years. You know, so it worked out well. Would I do it again? Oh yeah, I would do it again, definitely. But I'm not going to. Obviously, I'm not. No, there's no way I would do it right now.
You don't have to.
No, I don't have to. I've been there, done that. I got the point. Yeah. So OCS, Fort Benning.
So what do you come out of OCS as?
I came out as a second lieutenant in June of 1986. Got to move my family to Chattanooga, Tennessee at the time, and after that, I went on to Fort Sill, Oklahoma to become a field artillery officer. And that was, yep, go figure. They make me a field artillery officer. It's going from a military intelligence analyst as an enlisted to a field artillery officer. My understanding is because I already had the security clearance, and the field artillery had nuclear weapons, and they need people with security clearances to do that. So it was pretty easy to follow the thread from one to the other, and I'm glad they did. It was good. I had thought about transferring back to the military intelligence, but after getting into being a field artillery officer and doing that, it was definitely worthwhile. I enjoyed that. So I did my officer basic school at Fort Sill.
Can you go through some of the training you went through for that? Or
for
artillery?
For artillery? Sure. A lot of classroom training, learning how to do computation for artillery. It's not difficult, but you have to know math. And math, and when I was in high school, was not my strong suit, but by the time I got to the artillery school, it was pretty good. But you use tables and different tables. A book that's got just tables of computations and whatnot that have been made and developed over the course of decades, and on different types of artillery shells, on the powder that actually fires it, combinations of such, how far you want it to fire, and so forth. So you learn how to do the computations, how to plan where you want it to actually land. So we sing in charts and darts, it's called, actually using protractors and gauges to determine the direction of the fire and so forth.
What's the biggest cannon you worked on?
Pardon?
What's the biggest cannon?
I was actually on an 8-inch cannon, which was the largest cannon the Army had at the time. It's no longer in the inventory. But the 8-inch cannon was M110 Alpha 2, had a long tube, no crew compartment or anything like that. Not like the current M109 howitzer that they have, but it was a very accurate cannon. Very accurate howitzer.
How far could something like that shoot?
It could shoot probably 30 kilometers with the rocket-assisted projectile. Otherwise, it was probably in the 16, 17, 18 kilometer range, depending on the amount of powder you used.
For us that don't know the metric system, that'd be how far?
Metric system?
No. How many kilometers? How many miles?
How many miles? Let's see, 30 kilometers would be what? 23, something like that? Something like that.
Okay.
Yeah. So give or take, and if you had a tailwind, you get a little boost. So because it was a big shell, it was a 200-pound shell. And there is nothing in the inventory right now that carries that weight. Everything now is in the 100-pound, around 100 pounds, which is the most common artillery system type shell used in at least with our NATO allies. It's a common artillery shell, but. Yeah, the 8-inch cannon was good as a cannon or howitzer, but so after basic Army field artillery basic school, my first duty station was as an officer was Fort Stewart, Georgia, and it was actually a composite battalion of 8-inch cannons and MLRS. There was a battery of MLRS and 2 batteries of 8-inch. And while I was there, started out as a fire direction officer, doing all the computations that I mentioned with regard to using charts and darts, but we also had computers that we used to help. So the first year as a fire direction officer, second year as a platoon sergeant or platoon leader, actually having a platoon of 8 howitzers under my command.
So how many guys on one howitzer?
Roughly, guys on a howitzer is normally a crew of 6, as I recall. A gunner and a chief, and then ammunition bearers, and like about six people. So
they still call them gun bunnies?
Gun bunnies, yep. That has not changed. They're still the same. So and the 8-inch, like I said, is very accurate, and all the soldiers we had, except for the fact that, like I said, there's no crew compartment, so you're out in the elements, And Fort Stewart, Georgia gets, like this time of the year, it's hot and rainy, you know, it's wet, and then it's hot and humid. So there's that fact of being an artilleryman on an 8-inch, is that you don't have the protection from the elements that some of the others do. But they all loved it because it was easy to operate, very accurate, and you could always depend on when you pull the lanyard to fire it, it's going to fire. Very few issues with regard to the 8-inch, as long as it's set up right. So there's no issues there. So I said it was a composite battalion. All right. So when I first got there, we had, like I said, two companies or two batteries of 8-inch and one battery of MLRS, which was 6 howitzers per battery. So there were 12 howitzers and then 6 launchers of the MLRS. When we switched over to being pure 8-inch battalion, there were 3 batteries of 8. So we went from being 12 to 24 cannons or howitzers, and each company or each battery had 8, and each platoon had 4. So that's a lot of firepower in a battery or in a battalion compared to what we had. It's basically doubled our firepower, which was impressive when you do a DeVardy shoot, division artillery shoot with all of the battalion shooting and everybody doing a time on target at one time, so everything's supposed to land at the same time. Fort Stewart would rock pretty good. It would make a lot of noise. So, but after doing 3 years at Fort Stewart, I went on to the advanced course back to Fort Sill. At that point in time, I'm a first lieutenant promotable to captain. Got there, and while I was there, I was promoted to captain and finished the advanced course. Basically, again, learning to refining your trade and your craft as an artilleryman. Additional instruction on leadership, because as a captain, they expect you to be leaders of a company or a battery, as opposed to being a platoon leader and so forth. But there again, you still do much of the same craft stuff you did as a lieutenant, learning to refine your artillery skills so that you can be the teacher of those that you lead, which was a key important of being a battery commander. Because you become the old man. You become the old man. You're supposed to be the boss. You're the old man, and you need to be able to teach your lieutenants and your soldiers too, if need be, on their craft as an artilleryman. So. But, interesting enough, at the same time we were getting ready to graduate, there was a little thing called the Persian Gulf. There was the invasion of Kuwait by Saddam Hussein, right as we graduated. And they put us on hold. They were supposed to move us on to our next assignment. They put us on hold until they determined whether or not they were going to put us into a unit going or being deployed or preparing for deployment to the Middle East. And so we sat there for a couple of weeks figuring out what was going on, doing whatever we needed to do, and we came up, and as far as I know, nobody that was actually snowbirding at that point in time, being on hold, was actually going to Persian Gulf, unless they were already assigned to one of those units. But I was actually considered a priority assignment. I was on my way to Fort Ord, California, Presidio, Monterey, to learn Italian. So they teach me Russian as an enlisted soldier, and then they send me off to say, you're going to go to DLI, Defense Language Institute, and learn Italian, because you're going to go to Italy and go to a nuke warhead detachment, nuke warhead group. So back up the family and away we go. So off to Fort Ord / Presidio, Monterey. Spent 6 months learning Italian, with my follow-on assignment to go to Italy, to Vicenza, Italy, to go to the 559th Field Artillery Group, which was the...
In Italy?
In Italy. Yep, in Italy. 559th Field Artillery Group, Vicenza, Italy, and spent the better part of almost a year there.
Family?
Pardon?
Family with you?
Family's with me, yep. And it was very nice. We actually lived on the economy, lived out in a small little farming community in northeastern Italy. Great place. Loved it. If I could do that over again, I probably would. It was great experience. But doing that, working with the Italian artillery units, they don't do an artillery live fires in that area. They actually go to an island. They go to Sardinia, which is an island out in the I can't remember what sea it is, but out in the water, and fire towards the shore, I guess, for lack of a better term. Did that one time with them, and then that was the only live fire I did while I was in Italy, which was interesting. But we did the nuclear warhead stuff. We had to be prepared for whatever came, and
Nuclear shells?
Nuclear shells. Yep. We didn't actually store them, but we trained on trainers. And I had a detachment of about 115 soldiers, and to include officers, and we worked closely with the Italian field artillery, training with them, field exercises with them, really working with them, becoming almost as part of the same unit, even though we were U.S., working closely with them. They took us under their wing with regard to ensuring that we had what we needed to do our job, and we obviously ensured that they had to do they had what they needed to do theirs if they were called upon to do it. But about the same time as, so early 1991, President Bush decided that it was time to retrograde all the tactical nuclear weapons from Europe. So everything we had at our storage facility was going to be packed up and sent back to the United States or other places for either destruction or maintenance. So that tour ended earlier than we expected. We ended up actually leaving Italy in April of '91, being transferred to Germany.
So you were there for how long?
I was there for 9 months, 10 months, give or take. Like I said, it was. If I could do it over again, I would. It would be great. It was great, but no complaints. Got assigned to a unit in Babenhausen, Germany, which was to the east of Frankfurt, between Frankfurt and Aschaffenburg, Germany. Nice small little caserne or post, and that was a MLRS battalion. So I went from being artillery, cannon, howitzer, to actually being assigned to a MLRS unit, which was a great experience.
What is MRS?
Multiple launch rocket system. It's a rocket system that was comprised of 2 pods of 6 rockets each. So, and that was pretty effective weapon.
Used on a truck, or
it's on a tracked launcher. Yeah, okay. Tracked launcher. The launcher itself was used quite extensively in Desert Storm, attacking the Iraqi forces. So
we'd see them go off.
Yeah. Funny story. So the launchers we had were actually shipped from Germany to the Middle East, and then they came back. And of course, they were green in Germany, and they painted them tan for the Middle East, and then they came back and they painted them green again. But I don't know if it was the sand or what was on the paint, but you take them to the motor pool, or the wash rack, and you go to wash them, and the green paint just peels right off, and all you see is tan underneath. And we were still getting sand out of those launchers 2 years after they came back. It was crazy. The amount of sand that
gets into everything.
It's into everything, and it's so fine. And but you're washing sand out all the time. And where we were in Germany was not very sandy at all. It was pretty heavy soil. So, so I commanded a MLRS battery in Germany, Alpha Battery 427, It was a good group of people. Enjoyed that, and that was my last artillery assignment where I actually had equipment. I left Germany in '94, going to Fort Bragg, North Carolina.
So you were from 91 and 94?
90 late
3 years
late, yep, about a 3-year tour. Left Germany in '94, going to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, and I was going to be a liaison officer with the North Carolina Army National Guard. I say the last time I really worked with artillery, that I owned, so to speak, that was mine, or that I was part of. Working with the North Carolina National Guard, they had cannon artillery, they had 8-inch artillery as well as 155 self-propelled.
So I got to ask you, Brian.
Yeah.
All the time you're moving from one place to another, how many times did you run into people you knew? From the service?
Yeah, fairly often, yeah. By the time, and of course it gets less and less as you go on. But people that I worked with or went to school with, let's say for the basic course, we kept in touch for the most part, and obviously over time.
You'd gone through a lot together.
What's that?
You'd gone through a lot together. So.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah,
we had. Some of them went to the same units that I went to. There were a couple of them. Other ones though went to other units, of course, around the Army, wherever they were. But you went like basic Army officer basic school. They come back for officer advanced school. You see them again. Some of them, not all of them, obviously, but you see several of them. And then even like going through OCS, you see people that you saw in OCS were completely different career fields, infantry or aviation or something like that you run into at your next duty station or another duty station. Completely different experiences, but you say, I know you, and of course you do know them at that point in time. You've known them for years. You just have not been in proximity to them or working with them. Yeah, but it's surprising. The Army it's a lot of people, but it is a small world. Considering when you can compare it to some of the other career fields that people take in their lives, it actually becomes a small world. So like I said, went to Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as a liaison officer working with the Army National Guard, and did that for a couple of years. Great experience. Our National Guard artillery people are very proficient at what they do.
There's a lot more training with the National Guard now than
there is, and they post Shield Desert Storm, at least on the artillery side, there were quite a few artillery units that actually got called upon to fill in other units as they were deploying. So there's that relationship, and there's a habitual relationship with some of these units over the years. One particular state has a habitual relationship with a Army division or whatnot, and they train with them and deploy with them at different times. So there's quite a bit of training with them, and we need to, because that's a very important leg of the Army. A lot of our combat power still resides in the Army National Guard. Yep. So, and that it needs to stay that way.
It's a lot more respectful than I used to be.
It is. They're not as proficient, as somebody does it all the time. But many of the people that are in these units have been doing that same job as in the service that they do when they were in the service. So it's just a matter of the training that they have. They need some additional training to bring them up to the appropriate level, but it's not like they can't do it. So it's a good thing. So, so Fort Bragg, North Carolina. Here I am, Readiness Group Bragg, being a liaison officer with the North Carolina National Guard.
And your rank is?
I was a captain. Yep, a captain, and doing that on Fort Bragg, which is now I guess it's called Fort Liberty, is interesting because you're not airborne, and so you don't have. Now, I didn't wear a beret or anything like that. and you're kind of like way down on the totem pole with regard to respect. Which is fine. I mean, you deal with it. We know that it's not a big deal, but it's a different world when you go to Fort Bragg.
You're still working with artillery.
So I was still working with artillery, but I was not in an artillery unit, which is different. That actually was the last artillery assignment I had, was at Fort Bragg, and it was good. It was interesting working with the Guard and the Reserve. The Reserve at that time, there was one unit that had artillery at the time. Our Reserve does not have any combat arms anymore at all. So, but July of '96. I moved to what would end up being my final duty station. Moved from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Fort Monroe, Virginia. Hence why I live in Virginia today, because that was my last real location of post, even though there were a couple more other moves. But I went up there and did something completely different. Not related to artillery at all, not related to units, like actual combat units or divisions or anything like that. Went up to Fort Monroe and worked on a special project for how to modernize the Army. All right. So we started working on how to modernize the Army in 1996 with a program called Army After Next. And from that Army After Next project, which ran for a couple years, we started getting into the Army that we have today. Even though it's not as modern as they would wish it was, it actually was the impetus for moving to a more modern service with more modern equipment and so forth. And we're now really starting to see some of that stuff come to fruition. It's 20 plus years later, but we're finally getting to where we wish we would have been in 1996. But so I did that for a couple years.
What do you think that was? Money or?
It's modernization.
Politics?
Modernization is difficult. People would think it's easy. You just get people to give some money to some people, and they go out and they do technology investment and try to make things faster or better. But it's not as easy as it seems. Many of the things that we actually use, there's such a large investment to start with that to change over to something new, it's not like you buy a new car. It's not like one of the automotive manufacturers changing the model year. You just can't do that. And the cost is prohibitively expensive, considering the amount of money investment. The whole Department of Defense industry is, I'm not saying they can't do it, because it's easy for them to modernize things, but it's very expensive to modernize.
What's some of the things you worked on? Was it weapons?
Weapons?
Body armor? Or?
Weapons was one. The concepts of employment, how we actually use the force we have. Trying different combinations, at least on paper, and in war games, of different types of units mixed together and to do different types of missions. So you'll have a task force that's comprised of a certain number of different types of units, and do war games, run modeling and simulation to do war gaming, to see if how that would compare to what we had before, and how it compares with what would be considered an enemy or a peer enemy, or a peer competitor. Say be it Russia or China, or and name a country and you can model against them, which is it's different. It's not like we're actually making plans all the time, but it gives people an idea of what types of formations we can use to actually get to modernize the force, make it more productive, make it more lethal, make it less expensive in many ways. If you make something less expensive, you can make more of them too. So,
right.
Yeah. But I did that job for a couple years. And then I was actually, they started something in the late 90s where you had your primary specialty, mine was artillery, and then you have a secondary. And it could be operations where you would actually work on a division or battalion or brigade staff, operations officer, or you could be an acquisition officer and work with actually building something new. But they gave me a couple choices, and one of them was being a foreign liaison officer. So what we call FLO. So I was a Middle East, North Africa liaison. Middle East, North Africa foreign liaison officer. Which is interesting because they again put me on a bus, so to speak, and sent me to DLI to learn French. So I've been Russian, Italian, and now they sent me to Defense Language Institute to learn French. A couple places in North Africa and Middle East that speak French. Morocco is one, Algiers is another, but we don't have anybody there because that's not where we can go. Some other countries, Tunisia somewhat has some French. So the northern part of Africa, and Lebanon has French as a secondary language. So originally I was going to go to Morocco. They came and offered me the opportunity, or told me that, no, you're going to go to Lebanon. So I finished my language school, came home off of leave, all right, packed my bags, and off to Lebanon I go. So I landed by myself. So I landed in Beirut, Lebanon, work at the U.S. Embassy in Beirut as a Middle East, North Africa FAIL for a year. And that was interesting. That was definitely interesting. Beautiful place. People think of Beirut, Lebanon it was considered the Paris of the Middle East. It was an interesting place to be. But Beirut, Lebanon is also a place where we had two embassies blowing up from the 70s through the 80s. So there were quite a few security precautions taken for all of us.
So how are you protected?
We rode in armored Suburbans. So you take any Suburban that you can see on the street right here, make it about 3,000 pounds heavier with steel plate and all that, and you got yourself an armored Suburban.
Are you protected by special forces, or?
We had bodyguards. Had a driver and a bodyguard. Normally went with two people. One of them, they're both bodyguards, but one's a driver. And
they were military, or?
No, they were all
civilian?
they were all civilian. They were all actually all locals, Lebanese contractors that worked Lebanese that worked for the.
So did you carry a weapon with you too? Or?
No, I didn't. I didn't have a weapon, not there, and that's fine. They did, and if need be, I knew how to shoot all of them. So if I had to pick one up, I probably could have used it. So.
Okay.
We did get a chance to fire their weapons in in a shoot house that they had underneath the old blown up embassy. So that was interesting. So here you have this 4-story building, and on the top there's a M50 machine gun post up there. Nobody manning it, but the mount is there so you can put a machine gun in. But it was actually very, very calm while we were there, which was pleasant. In fact, they actually had started to relax some of the security measures that we were required to follow. So, never went out any place without bodyguards or up armored Suburbans, but we were able to do several things with the Italian military. Out in the open, there was no issues with regard to security, but to that regard. But the precautions were taken because when you're driving through these cities, you never know, and they were very good at what they do. Normally, 2 vehicles in a team driving a primary and an alternate, need be. At the same time, we did some work with the Israelis. At that point in time, but most of it was with the Lebanese military. It was good. So I did that for a year. a week before I'm supposed to go, a week and a half before I'm supposed to go home, September 2001, another day that will live in infamy for the U.S. was 9/11. So we're sitting in the embassy, and I get a call from the defense attaché saying, "Brian, you need to come up here right now." So I was down in my office, and he said, "You need to come up here right now." So I came hustling up the hill to the embassy building, went in the office, and he said, "Take a look at this." I said, "What?" The plane had just hit the first tower, and everybody's kind of like, "Whoa, what's going on?" We locked the embassy down completely, and we got everybody, went into a heightened state of alert with regard to security profile. All the gates were locked. Nobody's going anywhere. If anybody was out, they were brought back in immediately. And so we waited out that day and the next couple of days trying to figure out what's going on, obviously. But I was a week and a half from redeploying back home, going back home. So not sure if I'm leaving or staying, or if there's going to be planes flying, or even if I can get a plane in the air, if I'd be able to get back into the States. So it was kind of a hectic time.
It's in limbo.
In limbo. But being in Beirut, Lebanon, we're fairly well protected. So I felt pretty good in that regard. But it really changed the perspective of what we were doing, and the lockdown was interesting.
It's gotta make your family kind of
a little bit, put them on edge a little bit. But even worried for them too, because they were at Fort Monroe, Virginia, on the post. So they were living there at the time.
right.
So you don't know if they're going to hit different headquarters or whatnot. But because the actual Fort Monroe was actually the headquarters for the Training and Doctrine Command, the 4-star headquarters for all training for the U.S. Army, which could have been a prime target if somebody really wanted to take out a headquarters, because it's very lightly protected. At that time, it was not after. After that, it was completely different. But knocked on wood, and they got us out of there on our time. Got us out of there. So I went back, flew back through Germany, back to the States, and went back to another job at Fort Monroe. So even though Fort Monroe was my last duty station, I was assigned there twice with a 1-year break for language school, a year and a half break for language school, and in Beirut, Lebanon. But when I came back, I actually came back as the Israeli liaison officer or program manager for working with the Israeli Defense Force. We had,
New language?
No, I didn't have no language. They spoke English. We didn't speak Hebrew, but they spoke English. And that was a very exciting and rewarding assignment. We had an Israeli liaison officer, actually foreign officer that was stationed there. Worked with them. A lot of it was primarily training on our part, working with them for training. Didn't do any of the other, none of the exchange of arms or anything like that, but it was mostly training and sharing that type of stuff with them on how they do their craft and how we can.
You promoted again?
I was a major, yeah, but that's true. So I was actually promoted to major in November of '97. So before I left Fort Monroe the first time, I was a major. And then from there, obviously, went to language school, Beirut, and came back as a major, and Israeli program manager. So that was good. Spent the next couple of years doing that. The war in Iraq and Afghanistan is still going on, and knew that the writing was on the wall. Did that Israeli program manager for a couple of years, and knew that I would have to move. That would be probably not necessarily with any choice of where I could go, because I had actually spent some time up in the Pentagon as a foreign area, or as a Middle East North Africa foreign area officer, working with the Army Planning Office and Army G357, working plans for war plans, working at future plans, stuff like that, as an analyst in as a 48 Golf or analyst, as a point area officer. Did that for a couple months, came back home, and my wife and I was talking about this, and they said, I'm saying, I know I'm going to have to move, all right, and they're going to move me, and it's probably going to be to the Pentagon or to the Middle East, and we just started discussing it, and we just said, you know what, I don't need to do that. I've done my 20 plus years, I've got a family, I really don't need to take that extra trip, so to speak.
So how long were you major?
I was major from 97 to 2002, or actually 2005. So 9
So you made a
years.
retirement for
Oh, yeah.
a major?
I retired as a major. Yeah. So November, or early correction, so that following year, 2003, late in the year, we started deciding that after getting to 2004, probably going to put my retirement paper in. So decided we're going to do that. And I retired in February 2005 as a major. Still field artillery, but never hadn't worked the job for several years, but very rewarding career. Enjoyed it. I haven't left the Army yet, really. Now I'm working as a Department of the Army civilian at Fort Eustis, Virginia, just up the road from Fort Monroe. I've been doing that now for 15 years.
So what are you doing for the Army?
I work in what we call requirements. The requirements brand.
They're sprayed for mosquitoes, so
That's good.
That's a good
That's a very good thing. I work in an area of I would basically call it requirements. What the Army requirements are to modernize the force. We talked about that before. What the requirements are for the Army to modernize the force, and working closely with, for instance, the units down at Fort Benning, or what is now Fort Moore, working infantry and maneuver, tanks, some aviation. This is where I work with, helping them develop body armor, the requirements for body armor, how they can actually get into the acquisition of new equipment. So, and that's a process. Everything in the Army is a process, all right? Not a bureaucracy necessary, but a process. And we work that closely with from the folks up at the Pentagon, the folks that actually do the bending of metal, and the program managers that actually own these programs, and with the actual with the proponent, which is in our case the infantry school, working on how to modernize their field. And been doing like that now for, like I said, for almost 15 years.
You're doing that for 15 years?
Yeah, 15 years. With a break. I took a break of 3 years, went to Afghanistan as an Army civilian.
Why?
Why? That's a good question. Yeah, good question. Working plans for training, we worked training and planning for U.S. Forces Afghanistan. So, stationed in Kabul, Afghanistan for 3 years, did that. Interesting job, working with some of the Afghan locals and nationals, but primarily working with units coming in to ensure they had the proper training to do their mission in country. Some of that's language, some of that is actually protection or safety issues. So I did that and came back to the Hampton Roads area, Fort Eustis, to continue my job as a requirements. But 22 and a half years service, active, another 15 plus now civilian. It's been a ride. It's been a good ride. I cannot complain one bit. So.
Anything else you want to add? Right?
All I know is that if somebody wants to have an interesting career or an interesting life, an adventure, they say, like the Navy, join the Navy, for an adventure, right? Well, I can say that you could join the Army and get the same adventure. Just you don't have to go on land. You don't have to leave the land. You have to stay on land. So.
And learn 3 languages.
And learn 3 languages on top of it. So, yeah. Anyway, that's about it.
Well, Brian, I want to thank you for doing this interview, and thank you for your long service.
No.
Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.